Endlessly, the dancers swung round and round. When they were dizzy, they swung the other way. Hour after hour this had continued. The darkness had fallen and the room was dim from the light of 2 smoky oil lamps. The musicians had spent all of their fine frenzy by now and played only one tune, wearily, ploddingly. There were 20 bars or so of it, and when they came to the end, they began again. Once every 10 minutes or so, they would fail to begin again, but instead would sink back exhausted, a circumstance which invariably brought on a painful and terrifying scene that made the fat policeman stir up uneasily in his sleeping place behind the door. It was all Maria Brzezinska's. Maria was one of those hungry souls who cling with desperation to the skirts of the retreating muse. All day long she had been in a state of wonderful exaltation, and now it was leaving, and she would not let it go. Her soul cried out in the words of Faust, "Stay, thou art fair!" Whether it was by beer or by shouting or by music or by motion, she meant that it should not go. And she would go back to the chase of it, and no sooner be fairly started than her chariot would be thrown off the track, so to speak, by the stupidity of those thrice accursed musicians. Each time Maria would emit a howl and fly at them, shaking her fists in their faces, stamping upon the floor, purple and incoherent with rage. In vain the frightened Tamazush would attempt to speak, to plead the limitations of the flesh. In vain would the puffing and breathless Mr. Yahukas insist. In vain would Tita Elzbieta implore, "Zalin, just go away." And the next line has in Polish, "Wait, out of the way. What are you paid for? What are you paid for, children of hell?" And so in sheer terror the orchestra would strike up again, and Maria would return to her place and take up her task. She bore all the burden of the festivities now. Ona was kept up by her excitement, but all of the women and most of the men were tired. The soul of Maria was alone, unconquered. She drove on the dancers. What once had been the ring had now the shape of a pear, with Maria at the stem, pulling one way and pushing the other, shouting and stamping, singing, a very volcano of energy. Now and then someone coming in or out would leave the door open, and the night air was chill. Maria, as she passed, would stretch out her foot and kick the doorknob, and slam would go the door. Once this procedure was the cause of a calamity of which Sebastianas Savidas was a hapless victim. Little Sebastianas, aged 3, had been wandering about, oblivious to all things, holding turned up over his mouth a bottle of liquid known as pop, pink-colored, ice-cold, and delicious. Passing through the doorway, the door smote him full, and the shriek which followed brought their dancing to a halt. Maria, who threatened horrid murder 100 times a day, would weep over the injury of a fly, seized little Sebastianas in her arms, and bid fair to smother him with kisses. There was a long rest for the orchestra and plenty of refreshments while Maria was making her peace with the victim, seating him upon the bar and standing beside him and holding to his lips a foaming schooner of beer. In the meantime, there was going on in another corner of the room an anxious conference between Tita Elzbieta and Uncle Antanas and a few of the more intimate friends of the family. A trouble was come upon them. The Vestahia is a compact not expressed, but therefore only the more binding upon all. Everyone's share was different, and yet everyone knew perfectly well what his share was, and strove to give a little more. Now, however, since they had come to the new country, all this was changing. It seemed as if there must be some subtle poison in the air that one breathed here. It was affecting all the young men at once. They would come in crowds and fill themselves with a fine dinner and then sneak off. One would throw another's hat out of the window, and both would go out to get it, and neither would be seen again. And now and then a half-dozen of them would get together and march out openly, staring at you and making fun of you to your face. Still others, worse yet, would crowd about the bar and at the expense of the host drink themselves sodden, paying not the least attention to anyone, and leaving it to be thought that either they had danced with the bride already or meant to later on. All these things were going on now, and the family was helpless with dismay. So long they had toiled, and such an outlay they had made. Ona stood by, her eyes wide with terror. Those frightful bills, how they had haunted her, each item gnawing at her soul all day and spoiling her rest at night. How often she had named them over one by one, figured on them as she went to work. $15 for the hull, $22.25 for the ducts, $12 for the musicians, $5 at the church, and a blessing of the Virgin besides, and so on, without an end. Worst of all was the frightful bill that was still to come from Greizunis for the beer and liquor that might be consumed. One could never get in advance more than a guess as to this from a saloon keeper. And then, when the time came, he always came to scratching his head and saying that he guessed too low, that he had done his best, your guest had just gotten so very drunk. By him you were sure to be cheated unmercifully, and then, even though you thought yourself the dearest of the hundreds of friends he had, he would begin to serve your guests out of a keg that was half full, and finish with one that was half empty. And then you'd be charged for 2 kegs of beer. He would agree to serve a certain quality at a certain price, and when the time came, you and your friends would be drinking some horrible poison that could not be described. You might complain, but you would get nothing for your pains, but a ruined evening. While as for going to law about it, you might as well go to heaven at once. The saloon keeper stood in with all the big politics men in the district, and when you had found out what it meant to get into trouble with such people, you would know enough to pay what you were told to pay and shut up. What made this all the more painful was that it was so hard on the few that had really done their best. There was poor old Mr. Hokubas, for instance. He had already given $5, and did not everyone know that Hokubas Savilas had just mortgaged his delicatessen store for $200 to meet several months' overdue rent? And then there was withered old Mrs. Anieli, who was a widow and had 3 children and the rheumatism besides, and did washing for the tradespeople in Halsted Street at prices it would break your heart to hear named. Anieli had given the entire profit of her chickens for several months. 8 of them she owned. She kept them in a little place fenced around on her back stairs. All day long the children of Aniel were raking in the dump for food for these chickens, and sometimes when the competition was too fierce, you might see them on Halsted Street walking close to the gutters, and with their mother following to see that no one robbed them of their finds. Money could not tell the value of these chickens to old Mrs. Hooknien. She valued them differently, for she had a feeling that she was getting something for nothing by means of them, that with them she was getting the better of a world that was getting the better of her in so many other ways. So she watched them every hour of the day, and had learned to see like an owl at night to watch them then. One of them had been stolen long ago, and not a month passed that someone did not try to steal another. As the frustrating of this one attempt involved a score of false alarms, it will be understood what a tribute old Mrs. Hooknieni brought. Just because Tita Elzbieta had once loaned her some money for a few days and saved her from being turned out of her house. More and more friends gathered round while the lamentation about these things was going on. Some drew nearer, hoping to overhear the conversation, who were themselves among the guilty, and surely that was the thing to try the patience of a saint. Finally there came Georgis, urged by someone, and the story was retold to him. Georgis listened in silence, with his great black eyebrows knitted. Now and then there would come a gleam underneath them, and he would glance about the room. Perhaps he would have liked to go at some of those fellows, with his big clenched fists, but then, doubtless, he realized how little good it would do him. No bill would be less for turning out anyone at this time. And then there would be the scandal. And Georgis wanted nothing except to get away with Ona and to let the world go on its own way. So his hands relaxed, and he merely said quietly, "It is done, and there is no use in weeping, Tita Elzbieta." Then his look turned toward Ona, who stood close to his side. He saw the wide look of terror in her eyes. "Little one," he said in a low voice, "do not worry. It will not matter to us. We will pay them all somehow. I will work harder." That was always what Georgis said. Ona had grown used to it as the solution of all difficulties. "I will work harder." He had said that in Lithuania when one official had taken his passport from him, and another had arrested him for being without it, and the two had divided a third of his belongings. And he had said it again in New York when the smooth-spoken agent had taken them in hand and made them pay such high prices, and almost prevented their leaving his place, in spite of their paying. Now he said it a third time, and Ona drew a deep breath. It was so wonderful to have a husband, just like a grown woman, and a husband who could solve all problems, and who was so big and strong. The last sob of little Sebastianos had been stifled, and the orchestra had once more been reminded of its duty. The ceremony begins again, but there are few now left to dance with, And so very soon the collection is over, and promiscuous dances once more begin. It is now after midnight, however, and things are not as they were before. The dancers are dull and heavy. Most of them have been drinking hard and have long ago passed the stage of exhilaration. They dance in monotonous measure, round after round, hour after hour, with eyes fixed upon vacancy, as if they were only half conscious in a constantly growing stupor. The men grasp the women very tightly, but there will be half an hour together when neither will see the other's face. Some couples do not care to dance and have retired to the corners, where they sit with their arms enlaced. Others, who have been drinking still more, wander about the room, bumping into everything. Some are in groups of 2 or 3, singing, each group its own song. As time goes on, there is a variety of drunkenness, among the younger men especially. Some stagger about in each other's arms, whispering maudlin words. Others start quarrels upon the slightest pretext and come to blows and have to be pulled apart. Now the fat policeman wakens defiantly and feels of his club to see that it is ready for business. He has to be prompt for these 2 o'clock in the morning fights. If they once get out of hand, are like a forest fire, and may mean the whole reserves at the station. The thing to do is to crack every fighting head that you see, before there are so many fighting heads that you cannot crack any more of them. There is but scant account kept of cracked heads in back of the yards, for men who have to crack the heads of animals all day seem to get into the habit and to practice on their friends, and even on their families between times. This makes it a cause for congratulation, that by modern methods a very few men can do the painfully necessary work of head cracking for the whole of the cultured world. There is no fight that night, perhaps because Jurgis too is watchful, even more so than the policeman. Jurgis has drunk a great deal, as anyone naturally would on an occasion where it all has to be paid for, whether it is drunk or not. But he is a very steady man and does not easily lose his temper. Only once there is a tight shave, and that is the fault of Maria Berzinskas. Maria has apparently concluded about 2 hours ago that if the altar in the corner, with the deity in solid white, be not the true home of the muses, it is, at any rate, the nearest substitute on earth attainable. And Maria is just fighting drunk when there comes to her ears the facts about the villains who have not paid that night. Maria goes on the warpath straight off, without even the preliminary of a good cursing, and when she is pulled off, it is with the coat collars of 2 villains in her hands. Fortunately, the policeman is disposed to be reasonable, and so it is not Maria who is flung out of the place. All this interrupts the music for not more than a minute or 2. Then again, the merciless tune begins, the tune that has been played for the last half hour without one single change. It is an American tune this time, one which they have picked up on the streets. All seem to know the words of it, or, at any rate, the first line of it, which they hum to themselves, over and over again without rest. In the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, in the good old summertime, in the good old summertime. There seems to be something hypnotic about this, with its endlessly recurring dominant. It has put a stupor upon everyone who hears it, as well upon the men who are playing it. No one can get away from it, or even think of getting away from it. It is 3 o'clock in the morning, and they have danced out all their joy, and danced out all their strength, and all the strength that unlimited drink can lend them, and still, there is no one among them who has the power to think of stopping. Promptly at 7 o'clock, the same Monday morning, they will every one of them have to be in their places at Durham's or Brown's or Jones's, each in his working clothes. If one of them be a minute late, he'll be docked an hour's pay, and if he be many minutes late, he'll be apt to find his brass check turned to the wall. He will be docked an hour's pay, and if he be many minutes late, he will be apt to find his brass cheek. He will be apt to find his brass check turned to the wall, which will send him out to join the hungry mob that waits every morning at the gates of the packing houses from 6 o'clock until nearly 8:30. There is no exception to this rule, not even little Ona, who has asked for a holiday the day after her wedding day, a holiday without pay, and has been refused. While there are so many who are anxious to work as you wish, there is no occasion for incommoding yourself with those who must work otherwise. Little Ona is nearly ready to faint, and half in stupor herself, because of the heavy scent in the room. She has not taken a drop, but everyone else there is literally burning alcohol as the lamps are burning oil. Some of the men who are sound asleep in their chairs or on the floor are reeking of it so that you cannot go near them. Now and then Hurgis gazes at her hungrily. He has long since forgotten his shyness, but then the crowd is there, and he still waits and watches the door where a carriage is supposed to come. It does not, and finally he will wait no longer, but comes up to Ona, who turns white and trembles. He puts her shawl about her, and then his own coat. They live only 2 blocks away. Hurgis does not care about the carriage. There is almost no farewell. The dancers do not notice them, and all the children and many of the old folks had fallen asleep of sheer exhaustion. Uncle Antanas is asleep, and so are the Svedlizashes, husband and wife, the former snoring in octaves. There is Teta, Elzbieta, and Maria, sobbing loudly. And then there is only the silent night, with the stars beginning to pale a little in the east. Hurgis, without a word, lifts one in his arms and strides out with her. And she sinks her head upon his shoulder with a moan. When he reaches home, he is not sure whether she has fainted or is asleep. But when he has to hold her with one hand while he unlocks the door, he sees that she has opened her eyes. "You shall not go to Brown's today, little one," he whispers, as he climbs the stairs, and she catches his arm in terror, gasping, No, I dare not. It will ruin us." But he answers her again, leave it to me. I will earn more money. I will work harder."